Athens, PA. Carol, when did you, what service were you in and when did you join?
I was in the Navy and I joined in April of 1968.
Okay. Is that like right out of high school kind of thing?
No, actually I worked, in town for about 3 years, but the job wasn't going anywhere, and I decided I wanted to change, and so I changed and went in the service.
Why, when you're looking for a change, what drew you to the service?
Well, basically equal pay for equal work, which at that time, you weren't getting equal pay if you worked in the area. And I wanted to be able to travel, which, I figured being in the service I could travel at the government's expense and, just meet new people and be able to get out into the world.
Mm-hmm. Why the Navy of all the services that you could have chosen?
Well, to tell you the truth, I like their uniforms. Blue was my favorite color. So.
Okay. And you saw plenty of it over the years.
Yes. Yes.
Is it still your favorite color?
Yes, it is actually.
Okay. All right. Because, that might have changed over the years. So you went into the Navy, you went into basic training.
Yes,
And after basic training, you had some career choices to make. And what choices did you make?
Well, I decided I liked working in supply because when I worked in the area, when I was a civilian, that's, I was doing, well, actually I worked in a bank, in the bookkeeping department, and I liked working with books and things like that. And supply was close to what I did as a civilian, so that's the field that I eventually chose to go into.
Mm-hmm. And you stayed in that field throughout your enlistment?
Yes.
Okay. And I've got a list here of several facilities that you worked at or were assigned to during your career, including being in New Zealand.
Yes, I was with Operation Deep Freeze in Christchurch, New Zealand, and that's the stopping point for the people, the National Science Foundation, when they go down to the Antarctic.
Okay.
That's the last stopping point before the Antarctic.
Did you actually get to the Antarctic yourself?
No, I was going to go down for 30 days, and they had me all outfitted and everything in their, the big snowsuits. But the day that the plane was supposed to leave, they had a whiteout down there, and they couldn't leave. So everything got backed up, and unfortunately, I never got a chance to get down there. And I was, kind of disappointed, because I always wanted to go down there to see what it was like, But,
yeah, that would be a very interesting thing. Any other interesting places that you did get to go to?
Well, of course, I was in the first contingent of women to go aboard ship, and I was on the USS Vulcan, and we, after I got on board that ship, we got to travel, to see different destinations overseas. And we really got to see quite a few ports that normally, if I'd been a civilian, I would never have gotten to see.
How many women were in that initial contingent?
I think there was about 67, 68, around that.
That many aboard that one ship?
Yes.
Wow.
And we were all in one berthing compartment, and unfortunately it was kind of tough in the beginning,
How many sailors aboard ship total? What was the total complement?
I think when we were underway there was, if I'm not mistaken, between 700 and 800 people. So
the women aboard ship represented really less than 10%?
Yes, it was very small.
Okay. But I was surprised by that number, 68. That would be a large number to me to suddenly put aboard the ship.
Well, we went in phases. The women officers, they went first on board, to get things set up for the enlisted, which that was the group I was in. And when we finally went on board, then most everything was in place for our berthing compartment.
Mm-hmm. Give me some of the ports of call that you've hit while you were aboard ship, and you were aboard more than one ship.
Yes,
correct?
I was aboard also the USS Yellowstone. Later on, I had a couple of shore duty stations before I went on board that ship. But yeah, and we, of course, being on that ship, I got to see some other ports too, you know, because that went underway also quite a few times.
Okay.
So, but yes, I was over in, well, we were in the Caribbean. We went to Scotland, Rome. We were all over in the Mediterranean area, France, Spain, quite a few places.
Tell me about when you first boarded the Vulcan. Now, you're in the initial contingent of women to go aboard a ship, and they chose to put you aboard the Vulcan. What type of a ship was it?
It was a repair ship, and what it did basically was, until we went on board, it sat in port, and all the ships, it was in Norfolk, Virginia, which is a major East Coast port, and the ships would come in, and then the Vulcan would repair these different types of ships, you know, destroyers, and, even aircraft carriers, all kinds of different types of ships. And it was an older ship. I think it was a World War II ship that they had converted over to a repair ship. And I think originally it was a troop carrying ship.
Okay.
It had double plate metal on it and everything. From back in World War II when they had a lot of problems with submarines.
So it stayed in, until you got aboard it stayed in Norfolk, and the ships came to it.
That's correct, yeah. They said, some of the other sailors that were already on board, that it was basically welded to the pier. And when we got on board, then of course, because of the news media and everything, they decided, well, we better set sail with it, you know. So they had to repair their own ship basically to get underway and stir up all those coffee grounds, you know, that had accumulated around it before it.
Great line.
Yeah.
Stir up the coffee grounds. What was your job aboard ship?
I was a storekeeper, and I worked in the supply department, providing supplies to the different divisions on the ship, you know, that needed different parts, you know, to repair these other ships that needed repair work done.
Okay. Any difference over the years from the time of the... When did you go aboard the Vulcan?
Let's see, that was 1978, I believe it was.
Okay, so you'd been, half of your career in the Navy had been ashore, and now you go aboard your first ship, and then you came back to shore duty to a couple of different stations, and then went back to sea again. How much change was there in preparation for a woman aboard ship, in attitudes about a woman aboard ship, between the Vulcan and the Yellowstone?
Oh, it was almost 180-degree turnaround. Because when we first went on the Vulcan, of course it was a man's world, you know, and they didn't really appreciate the women being there, you know, because of course they told them they had to tone down their language, you know, and had to act more gentlemanly towards the women. And, you know, when they're out at sea, you know, they want to, you know, do what they want to do. And but when I went on the Yellowstone, it was, you know, they were, the women were more accepted. It was just an everyday way of life, you know, there was no...
And how much time span are we talking? From 68 when you went aboard the Vulcan until when did you go aboard the Yellowstone?
Let's see, that was, I think, in the later 80s. That I think it was like 86 maybe, 85, 86. So there was a large time span between the two. And of course the Yellowstone was already outfitted for women. It didn't have to, you know, go through a lot of...
So you didn't take away anything from the crew that was aboard? Because no matter how you look at it, people who were aboard the ship before the contingent of women came on board would be bound to say, well, we used to have, but now the women...
Yes, exactly. And I think that was a lot of the problem because, the men said, well, like we don't have air conditioning in our berthing compartment, why should they have air conditioning in their, so there was there was a problem there.
Did you see much of an improvement over the time that you were aboard ship, just within the time you were aboard the Vulcan?
Yes, eventually there was still, some pockets of resistance, but most of the sailors, the guys, they said, well, you might as well like them because they're not going to go away and get along with them as best you can. But there was, there's always, I guess, no matter where you go.
Oh, sure. And I would think that some of the resistance had to be broken down by going to sea. Mm-hmm. Because it was obvious that, you're not going to go off ship to get away from the women. You're not, you're going to be together and have to rely upon each other in great measure while you're at sea.
Exactly. And they have what they call a buddy system. When you go into a port, you're never supposed to go alone, mm-hmm. Off the ship. So they always told us to make sure we had at least one buddy with us, mm-hmm. to kind of watch over us. So, the other sailors, they kind of watched over us when we got into these ports because they'd been there many times before, and probably were used to the civilian community overseas where, mm-hmm. We weren't. And mm-hmm. So they were telling us more or less, well, stay away from that area or, mm-hmm. do this or don't do this.
Would you recommend a career in the Navy to a young lady from Athens, PA, that's graduating from high school or has had a few years away from high school at this point?
Well, if they enjoy being away from home, which when I went through boot camp, there was a lot of young ladies that went in with the idea, the same as mine, that they wanted to travel. But after they got away from home, the home life, and they got into this totally different environment, where everything was basically dictated to you. Mm-hmm. You were told what to wear, when to wear it, and all that. Mm-hmm. They just couldn't understand, why they couldn't wear what they wanted to wear. So there was a large dropout rate from boot camp. Mm-hmm. If they can deal with the discipline and the regulations, yes, it is a good life, I think. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's bumps in the road, no
sure.
matter where you were. Mm-hmm. But if you enjoy traveling and understand the policies of the service,
Mm-hmm. You retired as a chief?
Yes, uh-huh.
For those who don't understand Navy rank, why don't you tell me where a chief stands within the enlisted ranks?
Well, I was the highest rank in the enlisted rank is an E9. At least in the Navy, and I was an E7. Okay. So I was 2 ranks below the highest possible rank that you can get. Mm-hmm. But when you become a chief, you have different living areas from E6 and below. Mm-hmm. And you have a lot more, extras, I guess you'd say, than an enlisted person would have. And of course, more responsibility too. Yeah. Because you're in charge of more people now. Mm-hmm. So,
As a chief, were you a chief when you were aboard the Yellowstone?
I made chief aboard the Yellowstone.
Okay. How were you accepted by the male chiefs? Because I have always known the Navy, that the chiefs are a very, very mm-hmm. select group and kind of a very close-knit group.
That's correct, they are. Mm-hmm.
How did they accept you as a fellow chief, as a colleague?
Well, when I went on board the ship, I was an E6, and I got to know a lot of the chiefs, while I was an E6, or first class in mm-hmm. the Navy. And at that time, women chiefs, they were, it wasn't unusual for a woman to become a chief. So. Okay. They accepted me pretty much, there wasn't a problem there because there was other women chiefs on board the ship before I came. So, mm-hmm. We have what they call an initiation ceremony when you do make chief that you go through. Mm-hmm. They see what kind of metal you're made out of. But of course I went through They get you up in the middle of the night and you stay up all day long and they play little games and everything. But, you know.
Do you want to expand on that at all?
Well,
I won't push you in that direction if you don't want to go there, because I know it's kind of it's kind of a secret kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a secret deal, you know, and they close off everything, you know, and so that other people can't see what's going on. But I know at one time they were complaining about it because a lot of people got injured, but you know, when we went through it, it was all, you know, they made things look like it was. Other than the goldfish we were supposed to eat, you know, it wasn't. And I wouldn't. That was one thing I wouldn't do because, you know, I like animals, even little goldfish. You know, I refuse to eat a goldfish. So.
But you were still a chief, and you were still accepted.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. I've kind of picked up on, from looking at your resume here, this whole thing about being, number one, a woman in the military, and then a woman aboard ship, and maybe I've made too much of that. Are there other areas of your experience in the Navy that you would like to talk about besides the fact that you were in this initial contingent that went aboard a ship? Are there other things that that you did and saw that you want to make sure are recorded for people to know about in the future?
Well, basically, when I was in New Zealand, you know, that was a beautiful spot to be in, and I got to do a lot of touring around the countryside. And it's just, when you go overseas to different areas, it's a whole different culture, you know, and it's, for some people it's hard to get adjusted to, but you know, in the military, when you're supposed to have more of an open mind about, you know, different things like that, it was pretty easy to adjust to their culture, and you know, they got to know us and we got to know them, and I enjoyed, you know, all my tours that I had and the different ports I was in when I was on board ship, and meeting a lot of foreign people that I probably would never have met, you know, had I stayed in the area. And it was just interesting to meet different cultures and to see the way they live, and to talk back and forth, you know, about our cultures versus theirs and everything.
Do you still stay in touch with many of your former comrades?
Well, some of them I did for a while, but unfortunately, you know, I've lost contact over the years.
Yeah, it has been a while, hasn't it? I just was realizing, 89.
Yeah,
it's
a long time.
Nearly 15 years now. You're coming up on 14 years since you retired. What else would you like to tell me about the Navy and your experiences? Things that people wanting to know about the Navy in general would find interesting, or about a woman in the Navy with some of your special experiences?
Well, really anymore, a woman in the Navy isn't any different than just being in the Navy, you know. They're pretty much accepted now as part of the Navy, you know. It's just not the women in the Navy, you know, being separate. I enjoyed it because it gave me a chance to get out into society. There were, you know, when you first go through boot camp, you have to learn a lot of things about the service that can be hard, you know, that you have to understand. They have rules and regulations, and there's certain things you do. Yeah. But I don't know, I enjoyed it, you know, other than, like I said, having a few, you know, bumps in the road, but overall I really enjoyed it.
Okay. Then, you know, at this point, we haven't been on tape very long, but we've pretty much covered the subject. You know, if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of go through the stations that you've been at and just mention them to see if they trigger anything in you that you want to tell as added. And then we'll just wrap up. How's that sound to you? Okay. Bainbridge was your recruit training, and
Right.
you mentioned some of that. Anything else that you want to mention about Bainbridge?
Well, I don't know, basically, when I went through, you know, when, of course, that was quite a while back, they had certain regulations about you had to do your hair up every day, or every night, you know, and you had to wear lipstick. Now I don't imagine it's anything like that, you know, but that was kind of, I thought, kind of strange, but, you know.
That is. That would have been the last thing I would have expected.
Yeah, because it was all about, you know, looking nice back then. You know, we never were told we were going to sea. We never had to worry about training on weapons or anything like that. It was all about looking nice, you know.
Did you at some further point get weapons training? Did they
Yes.
ever bring that into the picture?
I actually, when my first weapons training was on the, I believe it was the Yellowstone. It was that far along down the line.
Wow.
Because in the Navy, there's no real need, you know, to have weapons training unless you're, you know, a SEAL or, you know, somebody that's going to be in actual combat. Because you're on a ship and they have their weapons. And of course, when I was on the Vulcan, they always said the only weapon they had was, you know, the rotten potatoes that they
Okay. You went to Memphis, Tennessee from boot camp. What kind of a station was that?
I was in a training, it was a training command where different sailors went there for different types of schooling. And when I was first stationed there, of course, I wasn't a storekeeper at the time, so I checked students in the various schools in the area.
Okay.
And I got to, you know, there again, meet a lot of different people.
Jacksonville, Florida, Naval Air Station.
Right. Yeah, we worked with aircraft down there, and aircraft parts, and that was the beginning of the computer era, I guess you would say, down there, where they had these big card machines, and that's, I worked in a big hangar where they, you know, you put all the information on these punch cards, like, and run them through those big machines.
Oh yeah, the card sorters.
Yeah, the card sorters.
Punchers and sorters, yeah, I remember them.
Yeah.
Okay, and from there you went to Pax River, Maryland. Back to Maryland, huh?
Yeah, back to Maryland. I worked in the galley there, which meant I didn't have to worry about going anywhere to eat, you know.
Food is always important in the military.
And we were always first to eat, so.
Yep.
And then for a while I worked in clothing and what they call clothing in small stores. It was, you know, where they issue out the different uniforms. So.
And then your trip to New Zealand. Detachment Delta, what a great name for an outfit, Detachment Delta.
Yeah.
In New Zealand.
Yeah.
How long were you there?
I was there about a year and a half, I believe. And
that is a good amount of time to be able to see the area.
right. And I never lived on base because they didn't have any housing for permanent people over there. So I lived in a house that it was out in the community, and it was really nice because the lady that owned the house, she took care of all the yard work and everything, so, you know, I didn't have to do any of that. Of course, I didn't have a lawnmower or anything, so being over there.
Yeah.
So it was a really...
Now, was the reason that you had to live in the community because you were a woman, or because there just wasn't enough space on the base for everybody that was assigned there?
Yeah, it was, everybody lived off base.
Oh, okay.
Didn't matter whether you're a man or a woman or officer, whatever. Everybody lived off base, but we were a very close-knit little group, you know, because we were there year-round, where the Science Foundation that came down, they were only there for just a few weeks, and then they'd be gone down to the Antarctic. So, you know, more transient people than we were. And so there was only, I think, maybe 30 or 40 total.
Oh, that's small a detachment.
It wasn't very large, no.
Oh, okay, so that would make a fairly close-knit group, just by virtue of the fact of being the only 30 or 40 Americans around there.
Brown, yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. And of course, we had days where we could wear civilian clothes to work, so, you know, they weren't as rigid, you know, in their regulations there as they would be, you know, if I was in the States.
Okay. And then came the Vulcan.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I'm only skipping it because we've talked about it a good deal, unless there's something more you want to say about the Vulcan.
No, I think.
How long were you aboard? I don't think I asked that before.
Let me think. I think it was a couple of years that I was on board that ship.
Okay. And then you went back to Jacksonville, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And from there to Norfolk?
Norfolk, I believe, was it Nav-Maso?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever all those
What
initials
all,
mean.
Well, that was the beginning, the real beginning of the computer era, and they were bringing in the computers, and what we were doing, our command was tasked with is going out to the various ships that they were installing these computers on and training all the personnel on how to use the computers. But unfortunately, we didn't have that much knowledge to begin with ourselves, you know, so we were learning right along with the students, you know. So we'd have separate classes ahead of time before they'd send us to South Carolina or, you know.
Also, you traveled a good bit out of that, out
Yeah.
of Norfolk then to various ships and various ports?
Ports, yeah, and even the Marines. We went down to some Marine duty stations to train the Marines also. So we traveled around quite a bit, training people.
Okay. And from that assignment, then you went aboard the Yellowstone. And you were aboard the Yellowstone for how long?
I think it was probably about a year and a half, I think. I believe it was, yeah, around that time.
And then back to
Portsmouth.
Oh, to Portsmouth.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was going to say back to Norfolk, but no, it was to Portsmouth.
Well, it's not far from Norfolk.
Yeah.
It's in the same general location.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
I retired out of Portsmouth.
Okay. What did you do at Portsmouth, and how long were you there? That last assignment before you retired.
I was there probably about a year. I wasn't there very long, and I worked in supply there also. You know, I was working in PSD. That's the personal support detachment there, and Portsmouth is the big naval hospital down there.
Okay.
And this was the personnel department that handled all the medical, you know, people that came off ships or offshore command to go to the hospital and back.
Okay. This was at the time of the Vietnam era, so you, while you never actually got over to Vietnam, you were serving around that era and so on. How did that affect the services in general, sailors in particular?
Well, that was, you probably remember back then, it was a bad time for anybody that was in the military, because I remember especially when I was stationed in Memphis, when I first got there, in order to be able to wear civilian clothes, we had to go through what they call a Seabag Inspection. And when I first got there, I hadn't gone through it yet, and so we had to wear our uniforms out on Liberty, which wasn't a good idea. But I'll tell you, people would make comments to me when I'd be walking down the street. I even got spit on a few times by people, you know, because people didn't believe in the military being in Vietnam. It was a rough time for us then, because there was so much hate out there about the military being in Vietnam.
I would have expected that of all places, that Memphis, Tennessee would have probably been the last one where you would receive that, or not just Memphis, but a lot of that area would have been the last area where you would have received that kind of treatment. That they would have been much more supportive, I would have thought, but not at all, huh?
No. It was bad during that time frame, and of course then when we were able to wear civilian clothes, then a lot of people didn't know. Because they tell you, you know, don't, you know, bring up that you're in the military, you know. But of course when I was first stationed there, I didn't know, you know, I was out on liberty in my uniform, and I was proud of my uniform, and I was proud of my country. But there was a lot of people that weren't at that time.
Mm. That's got to be a tough time.
That's why, you know, with the Gulf War and all that, I'm glad that people support their troops now more than they did back then.
Okay. Not the happiest note to leave this on, but I'm glad that we got that into the mix. Was there a time at which you thought that you might be assigned to a ship in Vietnam or assigned to a base in Vietnam?
No, basically back then they kept them away from combat as much as possible. Of course, like they said, if you're out at sea and something happens, you know, what are they going to do? You're going to be there. So
that's right.
They try and keep women out of the combat area back then, out of the combat area.
Okay. All right, Carol, any closing comments before we end the interview?
Well, I was glad to serve in the Navy, and I would recommend it to anybody that enjoys traveling and a change of life.
Indeed, indeed. Carol, thank you very much for participating in the process. You've had some unique experiences because you're a woman and because of the era in which you served, so this is valuable to have this information. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, sir.
Steve.